In this lesson, we are going to learn about how white wine is made. The first step to making wine after the grapes have grown is to pick them. By tasting the grapes and sending them for chemical analysis to check the acid and sugar levels, winemakers will decide when the grapes are perfectly ripe. Harvest is the first step in the winemaking process for both red and white grapes. For smaller wine producers and those vineyards on steep slopes, grapes are picked by hand. Hand picking is good because skilled workers handle the grapes carefully and can leave behind rotten or damaged grapes. Hand-picked grapes are cut off the vine using small scissors called secateurs and are generally placed in small plastic containers or baskets. These containers are either stacked on a trailer or the grapes are emptied into a bigger container before being sent onto the winery. Mechanical harvesting is another way of getting grapes from the vineyard to the winery. Using a machine to harvest grapes is cheaper and faster than hand-picking. The vineyards need to be on quite flat ground though, and the rows between the vineyards need to be big enough to let a harvester pass through. Today, the main type of harvester is the horizontal slapper, which has fiberglass rods that beat the foliage of a vine so that the fruit falls off and is caught by the machine. Whichever way grapes are picked, it is always better that the grapes are taken quickly to the winery and are kept as cool as possible. If grapes are worked with in the cellar when they are hot, astringent textures and unpleasant flavors can be produced. This is why many wineries choose to harvest very early in the morning while the grapes are still cool. It is inevitable that some grapes will get broken, either way they are harvested. When this happens, winemakers have to watch out for oxidation. Oxidation might sound like another complex chemical process, but you probably already know much about it. Have you ever taken a bite out of an apple and then come back to it later to find the flesh had turned brown? That is oxidation. It is simply any reaction between oxygen and another chemical. In winemaking, oxidation turns the grape juice brown and produces unwelcome flavors. To protect the grapes and juice from oxidizing, winemakers use small amounts of sulfur dioxide. This substance, that smells like a struck match, is added in small amounts to picked grapes and grape juice to protect it from oxidation. Sulfur dioxide has the added bonus of stopping wild yeasts from starting fermentation before the juice and grapes are back at the winery, and also does a good job at killing nasty little bacteria. If too much is added, which happens sometimes at big commercial wineries that make hundreds of thousands of liters of wine at a time, the wines can have a burnt match aroma and burn the back of your throat. Once the winemaker has picked her white grapes and delivered them to the winery, the next step in the winemaking process is crushing and destemming. Crushing is the process where grape skins are broken so that fermentation can begin as soon as possible. And destemming is the removal of the berries from their stems. As you can see, crushing is the same for both red and white wines. Once the grapes have been crushed and the stems have been removed, we can press our white grapes. A press is a device used to force out all the juice grapes have inside of them. There are two main types of presses. A basket press, like this one, where a big plate presses down the grapes and the juice runs out between the slats. Another type of press is the bladder press, like this one. Here the grapes are loaded into the cylinder and a long rubber balloon is inflated, pressing the grapes against the side of the cylinder, forcing all the juice out. Bladder presses are used for most white grapes. Now we have must. Must is the mixture of seeds, grape skins, and juice that is not quite juice and not quite wine. Red wine must will be filled with far more skins and stalks than the white wine. As white grapes have already been pressed at this stage, separating the skins from the juice. Even so, white wine must can still contain bits and pieces of skin and stalk. And if fermentation starts with all of this still in the wine, bitter, unpleasant flavors can be created. The winemaker has two options to get rid of all this gunk. She can either cool the tank down so it is too cold for the yeast to function and let all the bits and pieces sink to the bottom of the tank and then remove the wine, leaving the rest behind. Or she can pass the wine through a powerful filter that catches all the little bits and pieces. Once the winemaker has a tank of cleaned up juice, she can either leave the wine to ferment on its own or add specific yeast to the juice. If the winemaker is using a prepared yeast, she needs to activate it in warm water. This wakes the yeast up and gets them ready for their last big meal. White wines are either fermented in big stainless steel tanks or in oak barrels. Stainless steel tanks are great as the temperature can easily be controlled and the container helps to keep in fresh, fruity flavors. Winemakers can also use oak barrels. We'll learn about those later. Once fermentation is complete and all the sugars have been consumed by the yeasts, you have wine. But remember the lees? All those dead yeast cells are still in the wine and need to be removed before the wine can be bottled. For fresh, bright and fruity wines that are meant to be drunk young, this will happen quite soon after fermentation finishes. The wine is left to settle and the lees falls to the bottom of the tank. The wine is then sucked from the top of the tank into another, leaving the lees behind. In a winery, this is called racking, moving wine from one container to another. But these dead yeast cells are not simply rubbish that need to be thrown out. For many richer and creamier white wines, the wine is left on the lees for a time. By continually mixing up the lees with the wine, the winemaker is able to add creamy, richer flavors and textures to the wine. We will learn more about this in the lesson about maturation. Let's recap how to make white wine. 1. Pick grapes when they are just ripe and deliver them to the winery as quickly as possible. 2. When they arrive at the cellar, crush and destem the grapes. 3. Feed the grapes into a press and squeeze the juice out. 4. Remove the leftover solids from the must. This clear must is usually placed in a stainless steel tank or oak barrels. 5. Wait for fermentation to finish, also known as the big yeast dinner. 6. Once fermentation is finished, rack the wine off the lees and it is ready to be bottled or matured further. Wine making looks simple, and it is. But there are so many little decisions that can make this simple process very complicated. Each step has its own set of variables: how hard to press the grapes and for how long, what temperature to ferment at, and how long to leave the wine on the lees or in the barrel. But despite this complexity, all wine is made by picking, squeezing, fermenting, bottling. Before we learn about maturation and bottling, we are going to learn about how red wine is made.